In this section, we're going to look at dienes. And when we have a diene, that just means there's two double bonds in the structure. And there's a few different ways that you can have dienes in a molecule. I'm going to draw three different cases. The first is a conjugated diene. This goes along with what we talked about before and conjugated systems. So if you draw the sigma bond framework here and put a p orbital everywhere you have a double bond, and we end up with 4 p orbitals in a row, which is a conjugated system. In the second diene, what you'll notice if you try to draw the p orbitals, you'll have them here and here, but there's a break in between them. In this case, I just have a 1 carbon break, but it could be several carbons. This is considered an isolated diene because they're isolated from one another. And then the last case is an interesting one where we have 2 double bonds on the same carbon. This is called accumulated double bond. And in fact, this is given a special name in terms of the functional group. This is called an Allene functional group. For bond line structures, where you typically don't write carbon atoms, the way you would draw an allene within a molecule to delineate where it's at, we often just put a dot to represent the carbon so that it differentiates the 2 double bonds. The reason we draw it like this is because this carbon here is sp hybridized because there's just 2 groups, the 2 double bonds, which means it's also linear. So you don't draw it with a bend. But with these 3 types of dienes, going from accumulated to isolated to conjugated, they're increasing in stability. And this really should make sense because remember that resonance stabilizes everything, and resonance and delocalization go hand in hand. So having this conjugated diene being a delocalized electron system, that's a stability factor. Let's take a look at some experimental evidence and see the difference between a single bond, a double bond, and a conjugated diene. So if we look at the central bond in each of these 4 carbon molecules and measure the bond length, for the carbon-carbon single bond, the bond length is 153 picometers. You should expect the double bond to get shorter, and it does. The double bond is 134 picometers. But now if we come over here to our conjugated diene and we look at the single bond that's in the middle, what's the bond length there? Well, it actually happens to be 148 picometers. Okay, so this bond length falls somewhere in between a single and a double bond. And there's a couple of ways to explain this. Possibly the simplest way is to draw a resonance structure. So we have delocalized electrons, and we can draw a resonance structure, although we'll see it's a very minor contributor. If I take one of these pi bonds, push it to here, push the other one to here, we end up with a double bond in the middle. Again, in this second structure, charges are not minimized, but you can see how we do have double bond character right here in the middle of the molecule. The other way you can explain this is through hybridization. So in the first molecule, the bond here is made up of overlapping sp3 orbitals. In the second one, this double bond is made of overlapping sp2 orbitals for the single bond, and then p orbitals for the pi bond. And then in the third, this single bond is made of the overlapping sp2 orbitals. But if we do draw the p orbital picture for this, and put all the p orbitals in, even though it's not readily apparent, there's also p orbital overlap happening between those two carbons. So all 4 carbons share p orbital overlap.